Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our Virtual Enlightenment Salon, streaming October 9th, 2022. Today we have a fascinating conversation in store for you regarding next-generation social welfare systems, how we can harness emerging technologies for the benefit of humankind and for the improvement of people's living standards. So today we have a distinguished panel of U.S. Transhumanist Party officers and members, including our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, our Director of Applied Innovation, David Shoemaker, our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer, our member, Daniel Tweed, who is running for City Council in Thousand Oaks, California, and our special guest today is Simon Waslander. Simon is the Chief Marketing Officer of AGI Laboratory Incorporated, and he is known for a previous TEDx talk that he delivered entitled Cocoa, Food of the Gods. He also was one of our guests of honor at two previous U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salons of April 17th and May 8th, 2022. The latter is our famous Death of Death panel, so I would encourage you to watch both of those salons. And today, Simon has prepared a presentation for us on next-generation social welfare approaches. So Simon, please proceed.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be back. I'm really honored and thrilled to be on this panel. And really, my goal today is to show people technologies which are already here, which are close to deployment, or already being deployed. So these are not 20, 30-year away Star Trek concepts. These are all technologies that can be deployed tomorrow to improve the welfare of every human on Earth. Even if someone who is watching this does not agree completely with the Transhumanist Party or transhuman thought, we all want to live in a world where there is no poverty, where there is less suffering, and where everyone has a standard of living that we can say, I'm proud to be part of the human species. And the following presentation is a compilation of all the emerging exponential technology trends that I've compiled over the years of various research, and I'm so happy to share this with everyone. And I want to thank the U.S. Transhumanist Party for inviting me to share this, and I'm so happy. And let's get it going. Wait, yes, all right. So an executive summary. So poverty is a global phenomenon, and it leads to human suffering. It leads to ill health. It reduces economic growth, leads to increased crime, reduction in education markers. And in essence, it doesn't benefit anyone to that we have poor people, people whose quality of life is not high. We all want to live in a society where everyone has a high quality of life. And we're going to talk about really exciting technologies which are already being deployed, such as the 3D printing of houses, next generation solar cells, advanced healthcare, digital education platforms with AI, autonomous electric car sharing pools, and extreme environmental agriculture. And it's going to be a really exciting presentation, so stay strapped. So just for some perspective, we have to realize that 200,000 years ago, we were Paleolithic caveman in the savannas of Africa. Life was very, very miserable back then. There was rampant starvation, child mortality, infant mortality. If you broke a leg, you would die from an infection. There were predators, and so it was really bad. And we have to give humanity a thumbs up for where we are now. We're talking via internet communication. We're talking about all these exciting concepts, which we will discuss shortly. Civilization has gone a long way in 200,000 years, but it is still lacking for a large part of human society, which we have to which we have to make the endeavor to fix. But we've gone a long way. So over the past 200 years, we've made enormous progress in various markers of extreme poverty, although poverty in itself is relatively increasing. But the markers on extreme poverty, people that live on less than $2 a day, has decreased massively. Basic education has increased, literacy, child and especially infant mortality has been brought down enormously. We see that for the first time ever that the majority of people live in democracies, and vaccination for various diseases is also increased. So we're making good progress, but we need to accelerate this. And putting attention on the following concepts is going to help accelerate this. I implore everyone to do their own research about what we're going to discuss, read about it, do your own Google searches, and share it with your local policymakers and decision makers to really get these technologies on the policy-making roadmap. So just for starters, innovation and economic growth provide a very powerful feed-forward mechanism. Rich countries are more innovative. The more innovation, the richer the country is. And this is a powerful loop that really reinforces itself. So we want to stimulate innovation, we want to stimulate economic growth, and that will benefit everyone in the long term. For all the criticism that we get, that people are unhappy in the Western world, most people are probably unhappier in Angola or Zambia or Congo. GDP has been linked with happiness, and we see this on the chart that even the most unhappy rich countries are happier than the best poor country. Not all poor countries are in Africa. So, but we want to increase economic growth and innovation to help benefit all of humanity and get everyone on the right upper part of this chart. That's the goal here. So the first concept, which is interesting, and it's vital if you look at Maslow's pyramid of needs, Maslow's, you have housing, food, and basic healthcare are the most important parts for a human to live. With housing nowadays being unaffordable in the United States, in the Western world, these are pictures of a 3D printed village in Mexico. Some will be aware of that project, where they 3D printed a village for poor people. Although it's highly subsidized, these people can own their house with a mortgage of only $10 a month for 3 years, and the house is theirs. But that's a subsidized project. But if we look at the raw statistics, 3D printing already today is 60% cheaper than to build a house using normal construction techniques. A house can be, the edifice can be erected in 3 or 2 days. So that cuts the labor costs massively. So already it's 60% cheaper. And what's often overlooked are the following two factors: that beautiful designs. So if you want to design a aesthetically beautiful building, the design is not at any extra cost, so because it's 3D printed, and the quality of the concrete with doping of certain materials and certain techniques can be increased massively, in the sense that you have fireproof houses, you have houses which are 2 or 3 times as strong as normal construction homes. So you have the improvement in quality, and it's much cheaper, and it's much faster. So, and this is already being deployed. There are various companies in the United States and Europe that are already working on this technology and deploying it right now. So healthcare, so if people are unhealthy generally, they will be unhappier and less productive parts of society. We have an obesity epidemic in the Western world, and we have an undernutrition epidemic in the developing world. And So the undernutrition can be tackled by a better distribution of food, certain minerals, nutrition, nutrients, vitamins, and minerals to really help the developing world. In the Western world, we have access to more advanced techniques, which will also trickle down to the developing world in a while when these technologies get even cheaper and more ubiquitous. And I'm going to talk about two huge trends, which are the e-health sensor revolution, where you can measure your biomarkers in live real time 24/7 if you want to, and connect that to create next generation predictive algorithms with artificial intelligence. So I'm going to give an example. So let's say I'm an unhealthy person and I'm going to get a heart attack. These sensors with the AI algorithms will tell you like a week or 2 weeks before you get the heart attack or the stroke and those kinds of factors. So already go to the hospital and prevent the entire heart attack, saving tremendous amounts of funds and resources. A heart attack costs in the Netherlands, it's approximately 40,000 euros. In the States, it's even higher. And the human suffering of a heart attack, with people not being able to walk anymore, do sports. So that's also, so you just want to prevent the strokes, the heart attacks, the diabetes, and people, losing their legs or vision. And with e-health sensor data 24/7 and the newest generation of AI technology, this is quite possible already. And there are many, many examples from many institutions like Stanford, Leiden University in the Netherlands, and many others who are pioneering this revolution in healthcare. Agriculture. So to feed a planet which is going to have 9 to 10 billion people in the future, agriculture needs to be revolutionized so that it doesn't have the carbon output of regular agriculture. It doesn't use the land that regular agriculture does. And I had this discussion with Jason pre-show, is that, and this is an example that it's not on the policy radar yet. Even the biggest brand name reports from big organizations state that we're going to need so much arable land to feed the world. Well, what we're going to talk about here is, like, on the left we see an example. The paper is called Extreme Environmental Agriculture on Frontiers, where this is the most advanced greenhouse on the planet, to my knowledge, where they have special solar cells that let the certain light waves enter to feed the plants for photosynthesis, but still produce energy. It uses seawater cooling. The plants can live off of seawater, so they're specially manipulated plants that can live off of seawater. And this is a concept pioneered in Saudi Arabia, where with this concept, you can literally turn the Sahara Desert into one huge farm. They're already doing pilot studies in the Arabian Peninsula and in the United States in really desert, extreme hostile climates where you would not associate it with agriculture. They're already doing pilot studies on this, and I'm really excited about that. For more urban environments, so let's say you live in a large metropolis like Tokyo, Mexico City, or Amsterdam, London, we have really exciting concepts like vertical agriculture, where you can just build a skyscraper and just fill it with all kinds of fruits and vegetables, or mainly vegetables. But these techniques use really advanced hydroponic lighting techniques. They use like 90% less water. Fertilizer usage is reduced by like 70%. And it can grow 24/7, 365.25 days a year. So, I mean, you have a massive increase in food production without the land and all of the waste that we see. So these are very important concepts for the future, where we're going to feed 10 billion people and beyond without all of the environmental consequences we normally associate with that. The next problem that society faces is an energy problem. We're still using coal, we're still using fossil fuels, which are, putting an enormous burden on society. And my favorite technology is solar. one of my favorite technologies is solar, especially the cells that we're going to be talking about. But normal solar cells are based on silicon and rare earth metals, which are, although it's improved massively since the 70s, it's still relatively expensive to produce. It takes a while, and the rare earth metals is a problem because most of them come from either China or nations which do not have high respect for human rights and labor rights. So normal silicon cells are nice to get us where we are now. But the following we're going to talk about is a material called perovskite, which is abundant. It's very cheap to produce, and the only reason why it's taking a while to deploy this technology is the stability issues with this technology, with the cells degrading faster than normal silicon cells. However, the latest research indicates that we're close to surpassing the barrier where this technology can be deployed commercially and at a utility scale. Just for reference, if we build a full perovskite cell at a utility scale, it can provide energy for approximately 4 cents the kilowatt hour. On Aruba, we pay 30 cents the kilowatt hour. So, I mean, we're talking about an 80% reduction of energy costs. And that is not even taking another scenario, which is on the right picture, where you take this exciting material and use like metamaterial doping or other more advanced techniques where you really raise the efficiency. So this 4 cent per kilowatt hour calculation was actually assuming a very low energy conversion rate of like only 20%, and the theoretical limit is 32%. So if we get close to that, for all intents and purposes, energy will be free for anything we know right now. And if we combine this with other saving technologies, like there are in Brazil, in Sao Paulo University, they developed an anti-infrared paint system for homes, which in warm climates makes homes already 5 to 7 degrees cooler on its own. You have special anti-infrared glasses and really next generation air conditioning. So we're gonna have free energy, and we're going to be much more effective with it as well. So it's gonna be really nice to see this coming to fruition. And this is actually what makes me one of the most exciting things here. We know that carbon in the atmosphere is creating global warming. It's a huge issue. You have all kinds of huge organizations making all kinds of pretty negative statements, basically, that we're never going to reach that 2-degree goal. It's going to be a disaster, and we're already seeing problems with climate and extreme climate events. However, the following makes me very optimistic: is carbon capture technology, which uses the newest, if you combine it with the newest solar cells, and this is an example of where exponential emerging technologies crossbreed. You have these new solar cells, and you basically use the power to power carbon capture technologies. So the left one is one being deployed in Mexico, if I'm not mistaken, but I'll see in my detailed slide decks where this is being deployed. But the right one is a really interesting artificial leaf that's also aesthetically pleasing to watch too. That's going to be deployed in cities as a carbon capture tool. It looks a lot like a normal leaf. It's aesthetically beautiful. However, this artificial leaf is 100 times more efficient than normal plant leaves at carbon capture. So, I mean, this is huge, and really, we need to put this on the policy radar of the United Nations, of the UNESCO, of these types of organizations. These technologies are already here, and there are universities and entire teams working on all kinds of examples and derivatives of these technologies. So, I mean, yeah, let's get more attention to this and help solve global warming. Another example of how we're going to not only create a larger prosperity cake or pool, as you would call it, but also save resources is the following example of autonomous electric vehicle car sharing. So there are electric vehicles. So they run on batteries or maybe hydrogen, but we were going to assume just battery technology, and I'm not even going to assume like graphene enhanced batteries, just your normal batteries. But there are also many innovations in batteries coming along, because lithium is actually, again, we have this third world problem where it's being mined in countries and societies where labor labor situations are not always advantageous. So we need to get off of the lithium technology. And there are many examples of even iron batteries or air batteries, even, which are being developed. It's still a little ways off, but I'm excited about the lithium graphene battery, where you just add a few layers of graphene and it makes it just so much more efficient, really much more efficient. And so the vehicles are electric, and we're going to talk about a carpool concept. Like an average car, if people actually think about this, it's ridiculous. The average car is 90% of the time idle. You just use the car to drive to work or the supermarket, and the rest of the times it's just parked there, rusting, wasting precious resources. Well, in the near future, and we already have many examples of car sharing apps, but in the near future, you're going to have an app, and you can either book it like a day or a week. Like if it's work, your standard work day travel, you can book it like every day. But like in the future, you'll have a cell phone, and there'll be cars at strategic positions in every city, where within 5 minutes the car will arrive. It's going to be completely autonomous, so you don't need the driver, and it's just going to take you from point A to B in a completely clean way, without wasting resource and without the need. Like I have a classic car which I'm happy with, which sadly enough does waste gasoline, but you don't have to um, uh, use the money or the precious resources to actually buy a car. You're going to have a carpooling thing, and it's going to be really nice. The last slide is this is the cherry on the cake, and we're going to talk about lots of things. So Peter Diamandis, in his talk, really illustrated all the innovation that we've seen over the past 200 years with all the massive increase. Has been only about 2 to 3 billion human minds connected to the global brain, and contributing in an effective way their innovation thoughts and skills and all that talent out there. In the near future, and the best examples are Starlink from Tesla, or other examples from Virgin Galactic, from Branson. But the internet is going to be connected. Everyone can be connected to the internet in the near future, and then using other type of concepts, such as the ones that have been used successfully in India, where you just give everyone a $20 or a $10 tablet and connect everyone to the internet. Can we imagine the level of innovation we're going to have when 7 to 8 billion minds contribute to society? We're going to see a massive inflow of talent and skills in the near future. And this is technology being pioneered by, for example, Peter Norvig, but also other big tech companies, where you have a digital education platform with your own highly customized AI teacher that teaches you alone, really creating your own pathway. So like, for example, the average school that everyone is accustomed to has like 20 to 30 students. You always have a small group that needs extra tutoring, another group that's too quick and that you can stimulate more, and you have the middle group. So for example, if I'm not good at Spanish, the AI teacher will tell me, hey, Sam, I see that you're struggling. I'm going to help you out here, give you some assignments and really guide you. But I see you're really good at math. So we're going to speed that up, really creating a personalized um, platform with an AI teacher for everyone. And there's a really nice TED talk by Peter Norvig called The 100,000 Classroom. And so that's also important to know that it might be expensive, and I don't think 10 to 20 million is expensive on a global government scale for something like this. But it's a one-time cost where you can basically educate the entire world with, and combine that with things like an X Prize concept where you have like where the most talented, so let's say I'm a highly talented person in Angola. The platform will see like, hey, this is a really talented guy, and you give him an automatic scholarship to Harvard or Oxford, and really, give those talented people the tools and the resources with the scholarships and with the merit-based um, education things, and we can build a really nice world, and all of the things that I've just talked about are already here, close to deployment or already being deployed. And this is all pre-artificial general intelligence or extreme artificial intelligence. We're going to see a massive, huge increase in all markers of well-being and GDP growth and innovation in the future with all of these exciting concepts. And I hope we see this world and that we don't get a great filter accident, and that we can see what the future will bring, and that we can say, like in the book about string theory, there was a nice editor quote, like, if aliens come to the planet, we can say like, hey, I'm proud to be human. And that the aliens will say like, okay, yeah, they're actually right. So let's create a society in which that is the case for everyone. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yes, thank you very much, Simon. That was an excellent presentation, and we really appreciate you providing this most helpful overview of emerging technologies that can be deployed in the near future to greatly improve human well-being throughout the world. This very much aligns with Section 9 of the U.S. Transhumanist Party platform, which reads, "The United States Transhumanist Party supports all emerging technologies that have the potential to improve the human condition, including but not limited to autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, economical solar power, safe nuclear power, hydroelectricity, geothermal power, applications for the sharing of durable goods, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, nanotechnology, robotics, rapid transit, 3D printing, vertical farming, electronic devices to detect and respond to trauma, and beneficial genetic modification of plants, animals, and human beings." So within that list, all of the technologies that you mentioned are included. So the U.S. Transhumanist Party wholeheartedly supports the kinds of endeavors that you describe. And I would also like to bring our viewers' attention to Section 12 of our platform, which states the United States Transhumanist Party holds that present and future societies should provide education systems accessible and available to all in pursuit of factual knowledge to increase intellectual acuity, promote critical thinking and logic, foster creativity, form an enlightened collective, attain health, secure the bounty of liberty for all sentient entities, for our posterity, and forge new ideas, meanings, and values. And this section goes on to say that the United States Transhumanist Party supports efforts to reduce the cost of education while improving its access. In particular, the United States Transhumanist Party supports freely available open source methods of learning, teaching, credentialing, and cultural creation that integrate emerging technologies into every facet of the learning process. And the kinds of AI tutors that you describe are very much aligned with that objective. So we have many areas of technologies to discuss with you today. And the first question that I have is in relation to the healthcare approaches that you described, with a lot of diagnostic sensors, a lot of tools that would enable people to identify problems sooner. So my question is, how would you anticipate that integrating with kind of diagnostic testing that would require more, let's say, stationary equipment? Because right now there's a big problem in healthcare systems throughout the Western world. I have some experience with this in the United States, where on the one hand, you could get something like a blood test fairly quickly within a day if you try, especially if you're willing to pay cash. But if you want something like an ultrasound or an MRI or an echocardiogram, sometimes you have to wait weeks or even months. And if you are at high risk of a particular acute incident happening, like a heart attack or a stroke, and you have to wait months, sometimes you'll miss that critical signal that could save your life if the healthcare system were to respond and treat you. So how would these sensors that you propose interact with the healthcare system to enable people to essentially very quickly get the kind of care that they need? Are there any infrastructure improvements on a societal level that could be useful in helping respond to these situations quickly?
Well, that's a very good question. Thank you so much for that question. So to go into details, you have, like, nowadays you have the talking a bit about the e-health sensors. You have these patches or tattoos which can be just patched on the skin every day and deployed. So the sensors are not the issue. On a more primitive, less expensive note, you have the e-health boxes, where Leiden is a pioneer of, where you just get a box is mailed to you with all kinds of sensors and you just put it on. About the infrastructure, so there are already, and that's also being deployed and tested, MRIs that can fit within the ambulance car, mobile MRIs, and that's really, really impressive if we see how big, the actual MRI machinery is. But it's basically, so you have the infrastructure, that's a technological problem, basically, and that's being solved. You have smaller ecosystems, cardiogram. Nowadays, even the patches have these electric cardiogram technologies. So with the mobile MRIs that can be deployed in hospital vehicles, that's all being taken care of, in my view. The problem, and this is, then it becomes a legal, political, and other problem, is the shortage we have of really qualified healthcare workers. And one of the important facets that I see, and we're going to have a big problem with this, is that AI can do like diagnostics, most of the diagnostics and treatment recommendations. And we need that because there is just a shortage of personnel. However, what happens when the AI becomes a lot better than any human can, using all that technology, using, a supercomputer running 24/7 with your data, eventually humans will not be able to compete with that. And there will be a time where a human doctor might be considered unethical. So we have to already think about those kinds of concepts and think about those kinds of things. But the infrastructure is an emerging technology problem that's being solved at this moment by hundreds of teams around the world. And combine that with AI will help the acute shortage that we're seeing in healthcare sectors around the globe. And especially as well, and we shouldn't forget, and most people think that in developing countries that chronic disease doesn't exist. Actually, that's not true. Even in developing countries, the largest contributor to death and suffering is chronic disease that we also see in the Western world. And if we have shortages of MRIs and personnel and sensors here in Aruba or in a rich country like the United States or Europe, it's going to be much worse in Africa or in Southeast Asia or India, certain parts of India. And we need to deploy these technologies with the AI workers, with the algorithms, so that everyone on the planet has access to next generation healthcare so that we can all contribute to society and be healthy. Being healthy is a important part to the contribution to all kinds of facets of society in all forms, also mental health, by the way.
Yes. Thank you very much, Simon, for that response. And it's interesting that you mentioned personnel shortages as being principally responsible for the long wait times for people to access diagnostic services. That has been my observation as well. And of course, AI can assist in certain respects with remedying those personnel shortages, particularly in regard to interpretation of results or administration of certain routine procedures. It does seem to me that you still need human beings to respond in critical circumstances. Like if someone is having a heart attack right then and there, it would be kind of difficult to design a robot that would respond in a completely precise, targeted manner that's adjusted to the nuances of that individual situation. So you would still need human critical care teams to be standing by, essentially ready to save people when they have these kinds of acute incidents. But you could have certain services that are perhaps more routine or less urgent that are performed by AI. Or do you envision any possibility for developing robots that are nimble enough to actually save people's lives in critical situations?
That's such a great question. So on the first topic of the routine diagnostics, that's where AI is going to make the biggest difference right here and now in the very near term. As you already have many examples of all kinds of algorithms that can, for example, you have algorithms that can detect via voice, a human's voice, if someone's at a suicide risk or psychotic. So you have those examples. You have many algorithms for for everything that's based on heart rhythms and heart attacks, and the next generation algorithms are going to be based on advanced aging clocks, where you have like the sensors, but also your DNA, epigenetics, your microbiome, and all kinds of these clocks. And they're still expensive now, but like if you have the sensor technology and you're hooked up to an AI algorithm, there will be less acute problems. So the AI algorithm will tell you like that you have an issue in a week or two, but then it's less of an acute problem. So you don't need the emergency care workers. Emergency medicine has a high mortality rate and is very expensive. I mean, you go to a first aid center. Basically, it's like you just step through the door. It's $400 just to enter the building, and you want to have less. There will always be acute problems, like someone who had a car accident and those kinds of things. So on the first note, we want to reduce acute events. There will always be acute events, and you have to have human teams standing by, but they're going to be a lot less. So again, the labor shortage is going to be massively reduced by these technologies. On the second part, and that's a very interesting part, is the robotics. You have companies already, with the best example being the Da Vinci robot, where a human controls a really advanced hand camera, so operating hand, sensor, camera, robot, which they've done all kinds of. There are marketing videos, obviously, but where somebody can sew grape skin on a grape. So that's already that's still with human interaction. Machine vision and true artificial intelligence with the nuances of a human operator. So like just for reference, a surgeon has to study and do training for like 12 to 14 years before he's qualified to do a surgery. So even the smartest humans that are in med school need 12 years of training, of really harsh training, actually, really heavy training, to be able to legally operate in developed countries. And in the future, it's going to start always with the small routine operations. So like someone that has a problem in the gallbladder, that's a more routine type of intervention, or you have all kinds of smaller interventions that's going to get automated away so that we can allow the humans to do the highly complex stuff where human nuance, human intelligence is still the best to free so all these technologies. So you have always the so-called I don't know what's it's precisely called at this moment, but the one from the Industrial Revolution in England, where people were against technology because they thought it would take everyone's job away.
Oh, the Luddite movement?
The Luddite movement, yeah, precisely. and the thing is, like, this is actually going to free humanity so that humans can do the tasks that are actually like, and most people don't know this, but 30% of a doctor's time is used on routine tasks like filling paperwork, doing this, and all of when we automate all of those routine things away, humans can be used for the highly complex interventions or things that really require the attention and the nuances of a human. And there are already robots, to go back on the robot topic, there are already designs. I haven't seen them in practice, but like, for example, teeth implants, already robots that supposedly in experimental settings have been able to implant teeth into experimental skulls, not human skulls yet. But so that's an example of routine, but actually pretty complex task, because you have to be a dentist, and then you have to do the 1 or 2 years of implantology, and even that's getting automated eventually. And you're going to free those dentists to do like really reconstructive dentistry and really all kinds of other stuff instead of just filling teeth.
Excellent. Thank you, Simon, for those responses. And we have some interesting observations from Dan Tweed, who writes, sensors in the sewage system can do rapid medical surveillance. And also, a heart patient's life was saved recently by a drone delivery of an AED. And Dan, I'm curious if you would like to elaborate on either or both of those observations, as well as what you consider to be their significance for the future of medical care.
Yeah, that was that drone instance I think just recently happened in Sweden, but a lot of cities are implementing this AED, which is an automated external defibrillator, which is a pretty good technology for doing cardiac interventions when you get a heart attack person. I think whereas like CPR only saves about 10% of heart attack patients, the drone is up to like the defibrillator is up to like 50%. That's what I recall from my CPR class, which I'm probably expired, need to retake. But yeah, I think the thing that governments should be primarily focused on are health and safety concerns. Firefighting, rapid emergency response, and that's what I really want to see emphasized, because, with government, I think we're not taking advantage of the voluntary systems out there. I'm actually looking at I just joined the Friends of the Library, and, every city has a library, and every library has Friends of the Library, and some libraries actually loan out tools with your library card. So I'd like to see the concept of, not just books, but all kinds of things a library could do for the community, maybe including, drones with AEDs on them. I mean, it's cutting out the middleman is going to be a huge cost saver and free up a lot of resources. So strayed a little bit from the question, but boy, I just want to incorporate everything you talked about today into my city council campaign. It's kind of already am, but you're really putting a sharper lens on it. Thanks for that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Dan. And this is one of the reasons why we wanted you present for this panel, because we thought that the ideas that Simon is discussing could influence some of the proposals for your city council campaign, and you are in an excellent position to amplify these ideas. Also, Jason Geringer writes, how many people are going to be mad about AI taking that sewage sensor job? And I think that's a bit tongue-in-cheek because it's not a pleasant job to perform. And I think a lot of people would be happy to be liberated from having to do that, unless their imaginations are so limited that they can't think of themselves doing something else. I hope people who install sewage sensor equipment are able to move on to bigger and better things with their lives. Simon, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I'm a big supporter of what you call what Dan said about the voluntary work, but that's only possible when you have a certain level of wealth, basically, that you're free from doing, like, in the past, people forget, like in the past, 200, 300 years ago, most of us were farmers, and we had to work the entire day in pretty harsh conditions just to survive. And nowadays, technology has freed us from all that suffering and all of those tasks so that we can help our family, help the friends of the library, and really, really liberate and enlighten the human experience. So and humans are so this isn't a very important concept that's been discussed. Some people will be familiar with this, with Steven Pinker's book, the better angels of our demons, if I'm not mistaken, it's the name of the book.
The Better Angels of Our Nature.
Yeah, the better angels of our nature, where if you live in a more prosperous society, everyone is nicer. The more poor or unequal, or all kinds of those type of issues, society just functions with much less effectively. And we nowadays we have like philanthropy, people volunteering, people taking care of their old relatives, and all of that is due to, basically, technology is the main reason why we have free time. And we just hope that technology can liberate us from all of the things that we don't want to do. I don't think like what Jason said was a strong point. No one wants to be that sewage sensor as a human. Most people don't. So that technology can liberate that from us, and really what Dan said, so that we can all become even greater positive contribution to human society.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Simon. And now let us go to David Shoemaker, who has a question.
Yeah, Simon, I just absolutely love what you've laid out. And another thing that I love is your title. I was looking at your title on LinkedIn as Emerging Technology Evangelist. And I think that's really important from a marketing perspective, from a political perspective, because my question is around public perception. So you're talking to a friendly audience here as far as emerging technology is concerned. And it's really exciting for us to get on board and talk about this. But public perception is perhaps different than this friendly audience that you have. And we need to bring them along for the political action that needs to happen. So I'm wondering, with your evangelist hat on, with your marketing hat on, how do we get buy-in from the general public that these are real, attainable, usable technologies when the technology is coming at them exponentially, and many people in the general populace don't understand exponential versus linear anyway? So I'm sure you've given this some thought. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Thank you so much for that really interesting and enlightening question. And the way I see it is basically, we have to go back to the basics. What are human ethical and moral guidelines where all humans agree on? In almost every country, and that's like, we want to reduce suffering. So that's a big one. Almost all societies agree on that. So going back to the basics, so I'm going to give an example. So even if you talk about immortality or extreme longevity extension to highly especially Abrahamic religious people who believe that there's going to be a punishment, and they hope some people go to hell and some people go to heaven, and certain religions. You talk about immortality, they're just going to shut off right there. So you talk about those long away futures, they're going to shut off and it's going to become hostile. But if you just say, we can help you not get sick and let you live longer healthily, everyone supports that. The same with if you talk about, for example, a society, a post-scarcity society where there's nanotechnology and AGI and we all have universal basic income, and for all intents and purposes, material wealth will cease to have any meaning, a lot of people are gonna be looking at you. Either they're gonna think like that, what is he thinking about? Why this is so kooky? Because let's be honest, for the past 200,000 years of human civilization, everything we've known was based on scarcity, suffering, and death. So now that we're entering this epoch, this new phase with all the technologies and innovations that humans and in the future AI will do, we're gonna, I would say, bring it back to the basics, bring it back to the first principles that all humans, for example, United Nations human rights. That's something that most nations agree upon, certain Geneva Conventions as well. Bring it back to them. And, let's not talk to other audiences, not talk about the big things like immortality or the end of the material basis of society and post-scarcity and space. Bring it like we can build. So, for example, housing is unaffordable nowadays. It takes like $300,000, $400,000, $600,000 to buy a decent home. If you tell a person, hey, we can build a higher quality home for you for $50,000, $40,000, everyone will agree on that. So that's how I would frame it. Back to the basics, back to where everyone agrees on, and take the small baby steps. That's how I would frame it, and that's in my communication. That's how I frame it in the best way that people accept it, and as well and just to be honest, like some people, no matter what you do, what kind of presentation you give, or how beautiful it is, the idea, they're not going to accept it either way. And some people, you don't even have to have a presentation. They'll immediately, like, I was in med school in Groningen, and it's a really good med school in the Netherlands. And I was back 12 years ago, I was already talking about anti-aging and why it's just so much more logical to tackle aging itself instead of tackling every other disease. Well, the average person, the average student that I talked to was like, okay, I don't know what you're on, but this is not positive for you. Well, even professors were like, some of them were like, they didn't see it. However, many of people that I did talk to did see it. And my point being, some audiences are always going to be hostile, and to just avoid talking about the really, really controversial topics like immortality and post-scarcity, and really bring it to the small baby steps like $40,000 house. We can prolong your healthy life. You don't have to own a car, and still have all the services. So bringing it back to those practical steps, that's how I market everything.
Interesting. Thank you, Simon, for that response. Now, it seems that, yes, an incremental focus could work for a lot of people. Do you think this is the result of a prevalent status quo bias? That is, people can imagine fairly small changes from their current situation, but they can't imagine or may be uncomfortable with significant changes, even though significant changes have happened in the past, and with the accelerating pace of change, they have happened within the lifetimes of many people who are alive today. Yet somehow there's kind of a narrow horizon, a narrow time window where a lot of people are comfortable anticipating the future, whereas many of us in the transhumanist futurist community have much broader time horizons, and we're quite comfortable discussing or speculating about what the future might look like a few hundred years from now, or even a few decades from now, which may and likely will still be dramatically different from what life is like today.
Excellent point. Well, the human brain has more than 200 biases. So there is an enormous amount of bias in the brain, and that's been proven. There's a nice infographic from visualcapitalist.com that has an entire overview of those 200 biases. The human brain, we have to understand that most of our genome was laid during our Paleolithic period in the savannas of Africa. You only had linear problems most of the time. Like Kurzweil has this famous example, like, okay, there's a tiger there. If I keep walking, I'm going to meet him, so I'm just going to take another direction. That's linear thinking. That's how we're used to think for the past 200,000 years. However, we're already in the exponential phases of many technologies, and really it's becoming so. When the documentary, like, if I'm not mistaken, The Singularity is near Kurzweil's seminal book, where he wrote many other books long before that, like Fantastic Voyage and The Age of Intelligent Machines, where he already saw back in the early 2000s and even before 2000, he already saw that we're going exponential and even double exponential. The average person who is not trained in forecasting techniques, or who hasn't like really read about the concepts of exponential technology, will not be accustomed to exponential thinking. And we know that people automatically, and this is another bias, is that radical changes are often met with a certain amount of hostility. Like, oh, it might even be better, but oh, this is so different. I'm not gonna like it. It's like I don't want to see it. I don't want to think about it. And we also have to be honest. Like I said, scarcity, death, and suffering have been parts of the human experience since the dawn of recorded history, and now we're changing this. And the average person, especially like when I talk with people about immortality, because certain people have a really big bias about death, and that death is a good thing, and that those kinds of concepts, I'm like, what's going to happen when death is no longer mandatory, and you just destroy entire people's frame of mind with things like that, and that's why I don't advise those radical concepts and small incremental steps that humans will understand. Like, the average person doesn't really think about like post-scarcity space exploration, where we're going to go to other planets and and safeguard our species, because we're going in a really, really good direction. But we have to safeguard against those the so-called big filter risks, like a thermonuclear war on the planet, or a super virus that's engineered by a terrorist group. Have to safeguard against those, and really safeguard humanity, expand the civilization, and I think the first step will be to make Earth a happy place for everyone, because it's not a happy place for everyone. Make Earth a happy place for everyone, get into post-scarcity, and then hopefully we can all. I always dream. So this was. I do want to note this on a final note. Was when I was little, I was like, people would be like, I want to go to Italy, I want to go to France. I always said, I want to go to Europa, that moon right next to Jupiter or something like that. So I want to go to Europa. I don't want to go to Europe. I want to go to Europa, the moon. So, and I hope to experience, I'm still young. I hope I live healthily. I think I live healthily. And I hope to see a future where all the members of this esteemed panel can take a space voyage in a Diamondoid spacecraft to Europa.
Excellent. Well, I hope that that will become a reality as well. Now, you mentioned several important points. First of all, on the subject of the Great Filter, we held a virtual enlightenment salon in May of this year on my essay 2022, the year of the Great Filter. And I do think we are living through the most dangerous period in human history right now. We have 3 months left in 2022. And I will say, based on recent developments in Ukraine and Russia, I unfortunately foresee now about a 15% probability of nuclear war this year. I hope the other 85% will materialize in terms of the scenarios that actually happen. But this is still highly troubling for me, and I hope that we can figure out a peaceful solution to this conflict in Ukraine before it escalates into a broader conflict. The sooner the better. But in terms of various existential risks, I think it's imperative to deploy emerging technologies to mitigate those to the extent possible. NASA recently had a mission which was essentially an asteroid deflection type of mission, and I was very pleased to see that succeed, at least as a proof of concept for planetary defense. But Simon, what do you think could work in persuading at least large segments of the population that existential risks can be addressed through emerging technologies, and that it is imperative right now to work on technological solutions before these kinds of perils manifest in massive destruction to the human species?
Okay, that's a very good point and a very important point to talk about existential risk. So, according to game theory, Nash's equations, although Russia is not acting as a logical actor, and we're even hearing talk that there might be a nuclear event in Europe, on the continent Europe. So that's mind-boggling. However, most large non-rogue nation states, like excluding like a North Korea, will still be logical. I see the biggest threat in small extreme groups these are the perils of exponential technology. If someone was really motivated enough with enough years of preparation, they can make a super virus in their backyard if they know what they're doing. They're working in a group. So the small extremism parts are the huge issue, and how we put this to the wider audience, that the Great Filter is such a huge issue. I don't have an answer for that immediately, because like we have the disaster movies and all those kinds of things, but we know from, for example, from cigarette commercials, that negative commercials on that this is just so bad for your health, don't do it, don't work actually with addicts or all kinds of topics. They work for a small percentage, but really, telling humanity, like, if we're not careful, we're going to wipe ourselves out, mostly doesn't work from a large scale perspective. Now, the other perspective, I would say, to frame it like, if we help develop technologies that we can all have a more positive life, and we have to prevent like these small odds of us wiping ourselves out, I think that message will be accepted much better, in a sense, a message, hey, this is a world where us who are having this conversation in well-developed rich countries, I don't want to die, be it a Great Filter event or like a car accident. I want to live. And I would say talking about like, you want to live, right? Most people will answer that question with a yes, except, a small percentage, 1%, who's highly depressed will say no. But framing the question, do you want to live? It's only going to get better from here with the technologies we're developing. However, we also have to look at the risks. I would frame it from the positive end, because negative marketing never works for the majority.
Very interesting. And I appreciate those thoughts in terms of the positive focus on life. I think harnessing the love of life in people is an excellent technique for getting people to support the kinds of approaches that are needed to combat existential risks. And David Shoemaker pointed out that the name of the NASA mission that recently succeeded in demonstrating a proof of concept for asteroid deflection is DART, the Double Asteroid Redirection Test. So I hope that many more such missions will occur and that humans will become increasingly competent in warding off so-called natural existential risks, but also with man-made existential risks. Cultivating that love of life is important. And Dan Tweed in our internal chat writes, this topic is all the more urgent because China's leader is recently on record openly declaring that autocracy has obviously triumphed over democracy. He also writes that it wouldn't surprise him if the human extinction extremists released a biowar pathogen. So for the human extinction extremists and any sorts of terrorist groups, any sorts of misanthropic groups that value destruction or support reduction in human population or human extinction, we obviously have to be vigilant. I don't think we can really persuade these people. I think we need to deploy defensive infrastructure to thwart whatever they're trying to do. On the other hand, with autocrats, I think, as you pointed out, Simon, sometimes even autocrats, leaders of great powers, can have a certain kind of rationality, a certain kind of logical calculus behind their decisions. And at the very least, someone like Xi Jinping can be seen as a figure that exhibits a certain kind of logic, a logic of staying in power, a logic of perpetuating his own power. Someone like Putin may be a bit on the edge because of what COVID perpetrated in terms of Putin isolating himself from most of his former advisors and only listening to a kind of hardline clique, which led him to greatly miscalculate what the impacts of an invasion of Ukraine would be. So with Putin, we're seeing him essentially kind of vacillate between some logical decisions, some restrained decisions, and some utterly wild and irrational types of decisions, which leave me to be quite worried. But if we can even communicate the importance of life to an autocrat and appeal to that person's motives to live and stay in power, I have been thinking in recent days about how do we talk Putin down from the brink here. And one of the thoughts that I had would be to offer him essentially a comfortable retirement with complete immunity if he agrees to leave power, withdraw Russian troops from Ukraine, and hand over political power to a different government in Russia, which could negotiate an effective peace settlement with Zelensky. And I wonder, is Putin's love of life strong enough that he would accept such a deal if he can see some personal safety, some personal preservation in that?
So some notes on that. Putin already lives a very luxurious life. If you see his Black Sea Palace and where he so he's already an extreme level of luxury. I think, and that is the basis of game theory, is that the average person himself does not want to die. So he knows that if he were to start a nuclear war in Ukraine, the United States warned of catastrophic consequences, although we don't know what that means. However, if he were to, for example, send a nuke to a NATO member and there'll be a full-scale retaliation, he would die. I assume that he wants to preserve his life, and power is something, it's been shown in many experiments, some more gruesome than others, but that power is addicting, being on the top of the hierarchy, and I don't think he wants to relinquish power in any way. it's a very complicated topic, but geopolitically, Russia has warned for many years. So this is not a small, incident. Is that the Western encroachment of NATO all the way to Russia's doorstep has been felt by Russia? I'm trying to look at their perspective as quite threatening, basically. And that opinion, since the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia has been one huge joke. If we look at or politically, on the international scene, people have never taken it seriously. Russia has complained about NATO's Western expansion for many, many years, for almost a decade. No one listened. And then you get a hardliner like Putin. We have to remember where he came from. Putin was a KGB agent that was indoctrinated with Soviet Union, that mindset, like great Russia. And I'm not going to make the comparison with other even more sinister dictatorships, but really an indoctrination. And I think the love of life is the only thing that we can appeal to. Like, if you do certain things, we're all going to die, including you. And I think that's the only thing that we can relate to him. Because I also talked about, I do want to make a small point that I made this with Jason. If we don't have, Jason alluded to this, so I'm giving him all the credit for this one. If we don't get that great filter event or a nuclear war, this might, and I'm not, minimizing the enormous amounts of suffering that this is causing for the Ukrainian and Eastern European people, and this, and all of Europe who's suffering an energy crisis. But the world has waken up to the fact that we need to get off of fossil fuels. We need to get off of the dependence on fossil fuels, and we've seen a massive acceleration in exponential energy technologies now. And hopefully the suffering that's being caused in Ukraine can be put to a more positive use in the long term if we don't have a great extinction event by this war.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you, Simon, for sharing those insights, and definitely some sort of appeal to love of life is necessary, I think, in getting Putin to step away from the brink. David Shoemaker writes that Putin has daughters, presumably he wants them to live. And these were comments that David also made at our previous salon on the year of the Great Filter. He also writes that Putin has an irrational gambling urge in an effort not to lose. And this is the side of him that really troubles me. And if there's a way to offer him some sort of alternative so that he doesn't execute any sort of gamble, so that he goes back into the realm of predictable, rational calculation, I think that may help avert a nuclear war. Jason writes that Putin will want to feel tough, so he would have to have his own reality TV show. And that's what I'm thinking. We need to simulate some sort of environment where he feels powerful and in control. So in addition to perhaps letting him keep his palace on the Black Sea, we could give him some sort of mission so that he would feel powerful. It's not just that he would be in retirement and have to promise to stay away from actual human politics. We don't want him in charge of a country, but we would have to give him some sort of sense of meaning so that he would be occupied and consider himself to be very influential and powerful. Now, I've seen some rumors that he may actually be interested in life extension. One of his daughters is a doctor and endocrinologist. So what if we set a mission for him to actually spearhead some longevity research with the possibility of him benefiting personally, but the other side of that coin would have to be a renunciation of all political involvement on his part, stepping away from power in Russia, agreeing that essentially he will not interfere with whatever settlement is then carried out with Ukraine. And then another step that we need to achieve as a global community, in my view, is the nuclear disarmament of Russia, so that these kinds of threats cannot be exercised or even credibly made again. I think really only Russia and the United States have the size of nuclear arsenal right now that is capable of destroying the world. China's nuclear arsenal is not large enough yet, and I think it may be possible to prevent it from being large enough. But with Russia, I think we need to disarm it. And the only way to do that is if Putin is no longer in power. But the only way to achieve a situation where Putin is no longer in power is either to wait for some health issue to bring him down, or to get him to step down voluntarily, which I think is the better and more reliable course of action. And Dan Tweed writes, there are reparations to be considered. I think that could be considered within a peace agreement. So I'm even thinking of some sort of situation where, in order to alleviate any concerns about how the people in the Donbass will be treated, there could be a joint presence for a few years of Ukrainian, Russian, and UN military forces in that area, and they would be incentivized to keep the peace. The Russian forces, instead of having a military role, could be used as construction workers, essentially, in a rebuilding kind of role, and providing infrastructure, providing aid to the population. And then over time, they could figure out which of the people want to be part of Russia, and then they could move to cities on the border with Ukraine. So there could even be new settlements constructed within what is internationally recognized as Russian territory for those people to live, whereas the people who want to be part of Ukraine can remain where they are. So those are some possibilities. I'm really thinking we need to figure out a completely peaceful way to do this, because the way the situation is unfolding right now is not leading to any good outcome. Now, I think this is a fascinating thread of conversation, and one that we should continue to keep in mind in the coming weeks. I also want to highlight some other comments that Jason made. And Jason, perhaps you might want to elaborate upon those shortly. He wrote that agriculture slide was very reassuring. A great fear of many people is the possibility that we won't be able to produce enough food. We know from the 1950s through the 1970s, with humans using fertilizer, we started producing a lot more food. That's the green agricultural revolution. Actually, that was also when early GMOs, genetically modified organisms, came into being. And Jason writes, vertical farming has the ability to multiply how much food we can produce yet again. So Jason, would you like to elaborate on this?
Well, yeah, I mean, logically speaking, I can remember a point in time where I'm thinking, we are mathematically headed for a cliff, because it's like, basic math says that 10 billion people are going to, one generation, be how many more billion, and then exponential. How are we ever going to produce all this food? And part of our calculation is looking at the land like it's all flat, and we only have this much, so how can we do it? Well, vertical farming and all of this other technology adds a whole nother layer to it. So just like in the Green Revolution or whatever it was, where we started producing a lot more food, we're going to be able to do it again. So, whereas I once thought, oh, there's no way we're ever going to produce, way, so that's really reassuring, because that was one of the sticking points I thought we'd never get, but sweet. So, yeah. Is there any more about that, the vertical farming that you wanted to lay on us?
So, actually, we have the vertical farming, which is just so that can be built in a huge skyscraper and provide, if you have a few of those skyscrapers, can provide an entire city with enough food. Again, not being like,
it's right there in the city too.
Yeah, it's right there in the city, so you have less transportation costs, which are also a huge problem, but also less use of land. They can be grown the entire year round. Again, land-based agriculture, you have the seasons, and you have to plant different things, and so, and this uses so much less. A part that I did not mention in the slide, and that's also going to be a huge part, is actually the 3D bioprinted meat, because we all know, most of us know that meat is not good from the environment perspective, although some people um, but to convince society to not eat meat is never going to happen. People are going
Right.
to eat it anyway, and I see, like, providing people like with solutions. Like, currently there are the people who are motivated. Like, I know people in the Netherlands from Vegan Society and who eat vegan, uh, have all kinds of really tasty replacements, but for the average person, they still want that supposedly piece of steak and those kinds of things. And I see a great I see great innovation in stem cell therapies and 3D bioprinting of meat for consumption, because, like, the problem with meat production is, one, it takes a huge amount of vegetables to create 1 kilogram of meat, but the nitrogen that the animals produce is a huge issue. We're seeing large problems of this in the Netherlands as well, where the farming community is under attack, basically because they produce far too much nitrogen. So that's a huge issue. So we have to find solutions for that. And by the way, the bioprinting of meat is going to be a really nice first step sign that, like, in 10 years we can bioprint organs for transplantation in humans using a human's own stem cells.
Yes, indeed. And I certainly share the hope that bioprinted meat will replace meat that is farmed from animals. That, I think, is the only way to transition human meat consumption to a sustainable basis. And
it's not super crazy. I mean, when I look in my freezer, there's a stack of hamburgers. Well, I mean, it's already smushed up for me and everything. I mean, it's not that different. We might not even know.
Well, experiments show if you don't tell the person that it's bioprinted, they find it just as tasty. And in the future, the bioprinted meat will be more nutritious and tastier than normal meat. So people will automatically, you always, just like with electric cars, you have the early adopters, like the, I would say, sorry to use the word, but a little bit more fanatical, that, like, I really want to make a difference. I'm doing the sacrifice. I'm going the extra mile. You have the early adopters who make those changes so that the technology can develop. But eventually, 3D printed meat will be tastier, more nutritious than normal meat, and everyone's going to switch eventually. As with most things, there's this really funny video from the Netherlands where they interviewed people around the 2000 year, and some people are, I don't need a cell phone. Why would I want to have a cell phone? I have the voicemail machine, the tape, the voicemail tape. I don't need a cell phone. And we're gonna have the same with all these technologies where people are like, this ain't necessary, and then it's like, oh, this is just so much better. We're gonna do it.
I wonder, this goes back to our conversation about people's time horizons and the discomfort of many people with projections for a longer term future. Perhaps in 25 years, we can play back some clips of people exhibiting reluctance with regard to life extension and saying, well, I don't want to live to be 100 or 120. And some of them might be past 100 already, except they will not look like today's 100-year-olds. And we could show them what they said several decades ago and perhaps lead them to reflect and reconsider, given that in practice they might be more willing to take advantage of these technologies. David Shoemaker writes that he wants a food replicator. So I would as well. I think that would be an even more sustainable approach, and certainly one that would usher in radical abundance. And I like the point that you made, Simon, about the proximity of vertical farms to major cities. Right now, the problems of transportation and logistics can result in some severe disruptions to people's lives in the event of any sorts of supply chain problems. So if you can't deliver food to a big city, all of a sudden within a few days, you lose all of civilization pretty much within those areas, because if people can't eat, they will start rioting, they will start searching for food in any possible ways. Dan Tweed writes, apparently people are poor at predicting their future selves, and that's an interesting observation as well. So Simon, I'm wondering, what can we do to help people push their horizons outward? Because one rhetorical strategy, and the one that you outlined, is focusing on the near term and saying, well, these are technologies that could improve people's lives very soon. But another approach, a complementary approach, and one that I try to utilize as well, is to get people to see the further off future and become more comfortable with it. Do you think that comfort can be cultivated by leading people, for instance, to recognize that the pace of change is accelerating, that their own lives have changed? Maybe if they look back at what they thought about cell phones in the year 2000 or 1990, they could reconsider their attitudes toward other technologies.
You're absolutely right on that, and I want to make a small point, and Dan, and I'm gonna about Dan's point about people are poor in predicting their future selves. That's pretty true. However, we already have what certain companies are developing already, the so-called digital avatar of health, where I can see like where an algorithm shows like, Simon, if you keep doing this for the next 20 years, you're gonna look like this or this or this, and so that's a tool. Again, with the large horizons, I would try to really show them pictures like, do we want to live in a place where, like for example, like with the aging, with the extreme longevity, because people just generally, the basic conception is wrong. People think like, oh, I'm gonna live to be 150 in the body of a 150-year-old, not like I'm going to live to 150 in the body of a 20-year-old and feeling healthier than ever, and even healthier than when you were a child, like super healthy. And really, the basic misconception, like if we have Zach, another transhumanist member, made some really nice art a few whiles back. If you can show them like, we have this futuristic city where vegetables are grown on the spot, everything is fresh, you have your fresh 3D printed meat, energy is free, you don't have to own a car, education is free. I mean, these are things that I think everyone wants. Visualizing like these things, like for example, Star Trek was a popular series, but it also showed, if we can like show the people this is how a modern city would look like. And in the very first slide, or the second slide, because the very first slide is a title slide, but the second slide, to build with these technologies, to build a pilot village, somewhere on planet Earth, build a village that uses all of these technologies for the community. You got all these technologies in pilot village where people can physically visit this pilot village, this next generation village where everyone is at a much higher quality of life, where people can visit this physically, see it physically, make videos, make a documentary out of it. That's how I would do it. And you start small with a pilot village, and if that's successful, which is, who doesn't want to live in the next generation social welfare village, then you can expand to much larger projects. Like, for example, I'm really happy that there are companies that are tackling the 3D printing of housing in Africa, in societies where it's really needed, or that project in Mexico for the for the people who need it the most. And if we can like create a village where, you know, not just the houses are 3D printed, but you have the perovskite solar, you have the graphene batteries, you got the car sharing, you have all the, you know, the patches and the sensors hooked to AI and the education platform. The thing is, that is more of a project that a United Nations or a super federal type organization, so not just a national organization, won't quickly see this, but like a United Nations with their social development goals would like see this and like, okay, I believe in all of these technologies intrinsically, individually, but what happens when we put them all together?
Yes, indeed. And I think these are extremely important points, helping people essentially visualize that kind of future, give them palpable examples. Jason Geringer says this is where Zach Richardson, our director of publication, would say we have to move the Overton window, which is essentially the window of publicly acceptable ideas that will elicit a favorable response in the majority of the population. And I certainly wish that Zach were with us today, but I'm going to strongly suggest to him that he join the YouTube chat when this salon is streaming so that he can provide his thoughts regarding this discussion.
Oh, shout out to Zach.
Yes, indeed. Hello, Zach, if you're listening to this. And of course, Zach knows very well what the impact of emerging technologies can be, since he has had an artificial heart that kept him alive for several years. And several months ago, he was the beneficiary of a human heart transplant that is continuing to keep him alive in better
now he's a
health
real
than he
boy.
used to have. So Zach is an ex-cyborg, which is a very interesting status to have, but we're going to, I think, have more ex-cyborgs in the future when we have 3D printing of biological organs. So some people who had certain artificial organs may get them replaced with better functioning biological organs that are entirely compatible with their own bodies and will not be rejected by their own immune systems. Jason also writes that some people will think, how are we going to afford that? But we can. And I think this is where the argument that technological progress will help bring down costs over time, particularly when multiple companies or nonprofit organizations enter the field in an effort to make these advances more affordable, more accessible to broader segments of the population. What you said, Simon, about 3D printed home communities being established in Africa is an important part of that. And of course, the community you mentioned that is being built in Mexico is another example of that as well. Dan Tweed writes that good-looking, older, and vital celebrities help our cause so as to disassociate chronological age from biological age. And then he also says that he wants to see Thousand Oaks as such a model city for a working multiplanetary civilization. And Dan, you're in a great position to communicate that message with your campaign. David Shoemaker writes that visuals are important because the visual senses are dominant sense. He also writes that personal freedom and control over people's own lives needs to be sold with every new technology. So it's a way of liberating us, empowering us as individuals. And he says also he doesn't want a 3D printed home created for him. He wants to create his own 3D printed home. So that will be interesting. Personal 3D printers, not just on a tabletop scale, but on a larger scale. Perhaps people can buy home kits. Those already exist, by the way, for geodesic dome homes, for example, where, of course, one needs a considerable amount of technical skill to construct them. But what if one could have a 3D printed home kit where one could buy the 3D printer, the materials, but will have some flexibility with how to design the home, what styles to use, where to deploy it. David Shoemaker also writes, or in a partnership. So perhaps a partnership with a company that deploys these 3D printers. Is that what you're suggesting, David? Yes, it seems that is the case.
Yeah, exactly right. The idea of that people are in control of their own future using these technologies, that they're not imposed on them, or this is some of the kind of pushback, especially when you start hearing some of the utopian ideas. It seems like everything will be provided for you. And there seems to be something in many humans that go, yes, but I want to do it myself. And I think we can do that, and I think it makes it much more palatable.
Yes, and then people could customize those homes. They could select the styles. They could select the architectural details.
Yeah.
They would, of course, be able to design the interiors as well. And this won't be like project housing of the old social welfare type. And
I want to make a small comment on that. Like I alluded in the presentation, the design of so if you want to make a really radical design with the 3D printing, that's actually possible at almost no extra cost. So you can have a spiraling, like, you know, anything, basically almost any form that you would say that's feasible can be made, and you just need the software. And the software is pretty easy to use nowadays, so everyone can design their own homes, like you said. So I'm not advocating like the project housing and those kinds of things where people are like, okay, I'm poor and this is my place, but really stuff that people will be proud of to live in. And I truly support Dan. Dan, who wants to run for Thousand Oaks City Council. You know, if we can talk offline, and I'm highly available on LinkedIn, and I have detailed presentations on various of these technologies to hopefully make Thousand Oaks a example for the world. Because if we create this, I would say, village, this pilot village with all these technologies, it won't just be huge for the local population. It'll be an example for the entire planet. People from all over the world are going to be visiting and coming to Thousand Oaks just to see all of these radical things.
Yeah, and
Yes,
I might
indeed.
add that we're already a vastly high net worth city, and we're already a vastly open space kind of city. And these are two components that seem to tie right in with your formula there, Simon.
yes,
Yeah, you
excellent.
know, a lot of times, like going back about how people will say, how do we afford this? But what people sometimes will forget that the original system that they have now was built to have a meter on it. You know, the systems that we're talking about, these new ones, are self-sustaining, so they end up paying for themselves. So it's really not something that ends up being, you know, a whole, you know, different amount of cost. You know, it's like
That is such an excellent point, where there have been like many calculations, like if you have people under certain minimums of welfare, there's going to be more crime, ill education, less economic growth. So if you elevate, especially the minimum, if you elevate society in total, it will pay itself back almost immediately. With like, there'll be less crime, so there'll be less need for extreme law enforcement, prisons, and all those kinds of things. Welfare also leads to better health, so less acute interventions necessary, so better wealth is linked to happiness and all kinds of also economic markers. So you're increasing economic growth and innovation, which is that powerful feed forward loop. More net worth, more innovation, even more net worth, and it just feeds on itself. And that's the loop that we want to reinforce.
Yes, thank you, Simon. And I agree that raising people's living standards has numerous positive externalities in terms of reducing the incentives for criminality or other kinds of suboptimal or disorderly behaviors, because if people see good prospects in their own lives through essentially trying to lift themselves up through peacefully collaborating with others, they're not going to commit malfeasance nearly so much. What I like about your approach for next generation social welfare is that it is entirely positive sum. It is about how we can use technologies to build better lives and provide better living standards to large numbers of people. The older concept of social welfare that unfortunately some people cannot get beyond is either zero sum or negative sum. So it's more redistributive. And a lot of people with whom I am sometimes at odds intellectually will make statements like, oh, we need to raise taxes, or we need to redistribute wealth from the rich to the poor. And it seems to me this is a very short-sighted, unimaginative, and counterproductive way of thinking, because it presumes a fixed pie of wealth to be redistributed, whereas what we really need to do is we need to create more goods and services and technological possibilities so that the people who have the least can have a lot more, so that they can have access to many more opportunities, many ways of lifting themselves up. Dan, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I was talking with a constituent outside of the Trader Joe's the other day, and he was a retired electrical engineer, Asian guy, and he was complaining about, oh, I don't care, about 30 years, who cares what happens? And look at gas, it's over $6 again. And I said, well, look, what is it worth to have an economy? Because you can't have an economy without a functioning ecology. And people don't seem to get there's a connection between the ecology and the economy. I mean, the one is completely dependent upon the other. So, a functioning ecology is a prerequisite to the economy, and fixing it is priceless. So that's what the big part of my message.
So it's absolutely right that that redistribution in general senses is counterproductive. However, we do want to stimulate things like what Bill Gates does. Like if you're extremely rich, like, okay, I have 100 billion, that you would donate, or I wouldn't say donate, but like use that wealth to invest it in things like longevity, space travel, and all of the things that we hold dear, because like most of the rich people have a longer term horizon. And what we see with Jeff Bezos, with let's say Altos Lab, his space endeavors, and they're competing, all those billionaires are making a big macho show out of it and competing with each other, but they are contributing positively. And so you don't want to take wealth from them away. We just want to stimulate all the technology so that we can have even more wealth, and that we can elevate everyone's living standards without having to redistribute. I will say, and there's a really nice talk about this altruism in the nanotechnology age. It was by Eric Drexler. It's called Altruism by Eric Drexler, the nanotechnology professor. That if you radically change the material basis of society and go a little more in the direction of post-scarcity, altruism will be the only option. Basically, there won't be any advantage to hoarding anymore.
Yes, and I agree that philanthropy is extremely important, and we should encourage people of means to contribute more of their resources toward causes that improve the living standards of the vast majority of people. And that includes, of course, research into longevity, space colonization and space exploration, vertical farming, distribution of food, water, better infrastructure throughout the world. All of those are quite worthwhile causes. And I think voluntary philanthropy, as well as the establishment of nonprofit organizations that are dedicated toward those purposes, that have incentives that are different from those of for-profit companies, and therefore might be able to more readily focus on explicitly improving human well-being. All of that, I think, is absolutely crucial. Now, Dan, you mentioned ecology, and I'm reminded by your comments of the work of an architect named Eugene Tsui. His last name is spelled Tssui, and he explicitly incorporates ecological principles and what he calls biologic design into his architectural creations. He uses some quite elaborate geometric forms. And Simon, when you mentioned what the capabilities of future 3D printers might be with regard to homes, I see a conceptual alignment between what Eugene Sui is doing with his designs and what more people might be able to implement with 3D printing. I wouldn't be surprised if he were to use 3D printers in his own work sometime in the next decade, but his creations are really quite fascinating. He also tries to make the buildings resistant against various natural perils like earthquakes or hurricanes, for instance. And I think that kind of resilient construction is very important. It also reminds me of a salon we held with our friend Charles Holsoppel, whose 222 initiative focuses on providing a minimum amount of food, water, and shelter to each individual. And we talked about various construction techniques for shelter that could be deployed at scale. So I would encourage people to look at that salon. Now, I also wanted to ask Art Ramon if he had any questions or comments for Simon.
Yeah, I was trying to think of something good to ask. But the other thing that really comes to mind is the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline. I've been seeing a lot of things on YouTube on how firewood is the new toilet paper in Europe. And that's what I'm sort of getting a vibe from a lot of preppers in Europe. So seeing as there could be an issue with energy during a hard winter, in Europe, the governments will probably make the energy free if someone's poor. But what if just the whole system goes down? There's no electricity. What sort of contingency can the EU create with all existing resources without having to go out and create resources? But with existing resources, how can you maybe help generate heat? I mean, what could you can use the sewer systems and burn waste, go to the trash piles and somehow chemically convert the trash into heat? I mean, as a contingency plan, what could the governments of the EU do if for some reason there's just a drastic failure of the energy companies there and people start to freeze?
So that's a very nice question, and actually I can't take credit for this because I read this by a report from Saxo Bank that was actually published right at the beginning of the Ukraine war, and that's basically, so hear me out. Most people are going to be like, okay, so using dirty energy such as coal with extreme carbon capture. So like if you have a coal plant and you have like all the CO2, that if you have a really, and this is a short, I'm not advocating this on the long term as the short term fix for this very difficult winter, and we have to think realistically, like, already utility companies have gone bankrupt, asked for aid, and there's talk about energy rationing, energy solidarity, rationing of energy by energy intense companies. So it's a huge problem. We need more energy. So coal is readily available in Europe. And if you use the extreme carbon capture technologies, you can make it much, much more cleaner. And, burn the coal with a clean conscience. And that's what I would do if I were a EU politician. Like, there's still a few months for winter. So really put the carbon capture technology is already pretty developed. Maybe you have to fine tune some quirks at the factory level for the coal plant. But I would really advise people to look, European politicians to look into that perspective. Not advocating that in any way as a long-term thing, but as the short-term fix.
Yes, I think in the short term, it's essential to avoid severe disruptions to people's living standards. And this has been the point that I have made with regard to climate change. That is, assuring energy abundance today will help accelerate the pace of technological progress and the development of alternative energy sources that people can economically transition toward to ultimately remedy the problem of climate change. Art Ramon, it seems like you had a follow-up comment.
Oh, no, it's just that I've been in a hard winter without electricity, and the fireplace did not keep us very warm. So firewood, I think, isn't a very good option. So we're going to have to find some other solution if there is an issue there in Europe.
Agreed. I think we definitely need any and every energy source right now to help people affordably keep themselves warm, to help them maintain a reliable supply of electricity, since so much of our lives is dependent on electricity that we pretty much can't function without it for any prolonged period of time. As I've said, even a disruption of a few days to critical infrastructure in large cities will lead to massive calamities. People right now have a few days worth of supplies for the most part. Some of us may be stockpiling a bit of food, but even a lot of that food relies on refrigeration. So what if the power goes out for more than a few hours? I think it's essential to prevent that scenario from happening.
Got a quick
Dan?
comment on people not freezing to death. If you are not trying to heat the entire room or the entire house, you can actually create a hyper-insulated kind of emergency warming shelter, and a 60-watt light bulb or a small candle with a clay flower pot heat radiator will actually heat that space up in short order, and you don't have to freeze to death, even if you can't heat your entire usual heating residence. So just wanted to throw that out.
Yes, and I'm sure that a lot of people will be thinking about creative ways to either harness new sources of energy or make existing sources of energy go further in terms of providing the amenities of life. Of course, the more time and attention people have to devote to that, the less time and attention they have to devote to other tasks. And ultimately, the purpose of technology, as well as of readily available energy, is to liberate us from having to focus on the basics so that we can build higher levels of our civilization and our infrastructure. David Shoemaker writes, let's move to a reputation-based economy. And that's an interesting idea. Perhaps it could help more people consider philanthropy as a way of boosting their reputation instead of hoarding large amounts of wealth for themselves. Dan Tweed writes, some people seem to care less about the world they will leave behind. Can we reach them? And David responds, let's make them live longer so that they have to live in what they create. And I think that's a great answer to that issue. And I wonder, Simon, in the few minutes that we have left, what do you see as the best near-term prospects for shifting people's time horizons and expectations in such a way that they really recognize we could have a really wonderful future, despite all of the struggles that humankind is going through right now? And yet, we need an urgent change in thinking in order to lead us away from the brink. And so, what are the best, most effective ways of triggering that change in thinking very quickly so that large numbers of people and a large amount of talent can be dedicated toward steering us onto the proper course?
Well, that's a very good, very fascinating, interesting question. I would say, the human brain is primed to pick up on negative information first as the survival bias. I would say the most immediate quick fix is to have a special section in the news between certain news that people really want to see. Have a special section, the technological breakthrough. We're having breakthroughs every day, so that there's a section like, oh, we had a breakthrough in solar today. Oh, we have a breakthrough in 3D printed hearts the next day, and really put it in the news. So I only follow technology on my Facebook and LinkedIn and some financial news sources, and I don't see normal news. It's far too negative, and it only ruins your mood. But really, using those main outlets, those main media outlets, and forcing them to publish something, especially a technological innovation which is happening every day, putting that in the news and really making them put that in the daily news.
Yes, and I definitely think that greater awareness of these technological breakthroughs and their potential for improving human lives could reorient many people toward seeking and finding solutions to the pressing problems facing our species. And David Shoemaker suggests, let's rebuild Ukraine with emerging technology, a powerful demonstration of what is possible. I agree. I think we need to find a way to achieve peace in Ukraine as soon as possible, and then bring all these resources to bear to quickly, effectively rebuild it and hope that it remains rebuilt. That's absolutely crucial to have a lasting peace settlement. But human ingenuity can achieve a lot in terms of essentially showing us a positive path forward. Dan mentions that we could do the same with Florida. Of course, Florida has been ravaged by Hurricane Ian recently, and that could be done even more quickly because we don't have to wait for a peace treaty. We just have to reform certain building codes, perhaps, to allow this to happen sooner. And I hope there will be enough political will to do that. So thank you, Simon, for joining us today. I think we had an excellent, stimulating conversation about a wide variety of emerging technologies and their application in a societal context. You have been very effective in showing how these technologies can improve the lives of many people very quickly if they are deployed, if there's enough will and enthusiasm behind them. So I hope we can cultivate that enthusiasm through this discussion and other discussions to follow. And thank you, of course, to our esteemed panelists. Thank you to everyone watching this salon. And I hope that we all live long and prosper.